In Parshas Tzav, which is really a parsha that is really meant for the Kahanim and how they have to go about doing the avodah. And nevertheless, in the Parshas Tzav, we find a new korban which was not mentioned in Parshas Vayikra, which means in Parshas Vayikra you have oilo, you have chatas, you have osham, etc., etc. But there's one korban that is not mentioned in Parshas Vayikra, and in fact it's put in Parshas Tzav. And what is that? Im al taido yakrivenu v'hikrivu al zevach ha'taido chalas matzos mos mashemen u'kikim matzos meshuchim mashemen, etc., etc., etc. The parsha of korban tomid. What is a korban tomid? So Rashi comments over here. Im al taido yakrivenu im al devar haido al nei shenasale. That if a person had a miracle happen to him, and now he wants to express his hakoras hatov and gratefulness to the Rebbeinu Shalom, he brings a korban called a korban toida, which is a Thanksgiving korban. And what are examples of a nes? Yorde hayom, person went on a sea voyage. V'holchim idbores, he traversed a desert. Chavush beis asurim, person who was in jail. V'achaylesh nisrape, person who was sick and now is better. Shehem tzrichin lahoidos. So those are the four type of people that bring a korban toida. Lahoidos, shekosa behem, etc., etc. So Yissocher Rashi, this is what this pasuk is referring to. Now, this really just exacerbates the question. This is a legitimate korban. It's a korban that people bring on these occasions. Why is it not in Parshas Vayikra, where it should belong? Number two, Rashi says this is on a nes that happens to a person. What's an example of nes? Rashi says a person has a sea voyage and he came out alive and well, or he traversed the desert, which was a sakana, and nothing happened. And a person was imprisoned in jail, or who knows what could happen to him. And this is where we a lot of times bring a suda seidah because we were ill, etc., etc. We got better. Rashi calls this al dvar hayda al hanes shenasalei. Now, these things are, a person is in an element of danger, but we would not call it a nes, a miracle. The answer is that, yes, they're not the miracles like Kriyas Yamsuf or Makas B'cheres or the Eser Makas. But as the Ramban says, Al Hatera, we have nisim happen to us every single day. They're called nes nister, a hidden nes. Things happen to people all the time. And they're saved because the Rebbeinu Shalom intervenes and doesn't let anything bad happen to them. That is called a nes nister, and the Ramban says at the end of Parshas Bo, a person who does not believe in nes nister, ein lo chelik b'Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. It's part of the fundamental faith of a Jew to understand that everything that happens to him in life is directed by the Rebbeinu Shalom, and many times things don't happen, or things happen that are not change of the Maisa Bereshis, but nevertheless are called a nes nister. And that's what these four things are. Nes nister. You know, anything can happen on a sea voyage, especially in Talmudic times and earlier times. But you got out safe and sound, that's called a nes nister. But the question again is, but why is this in Parshas Tzav? This is a parsha that has directed almost 90%, if not more, to the Kahanim. This is a korban that affects all Jews. Why is it in Parshas Vayikra? And I think the answer is, not my answer, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, provided the answer. And that is, no, the Kahanim have to hear this, because the Kahanim work on the Beis Hamikdash, in which Chazal tell us that every single day, 10 nisim happen, but real nisim gluyim. The smoke always went up the one way. The fire was never put out by rain, etc., etc., etc. So the whole day, the Kahanim are surrounded by nisim. So if you're surrounded by such nisim, so when it comes to a nace like this, a nace nister, getting an operation and getting better, that's a nace. That's not a nace. And that there was never a fly in the mizbeach, even though all the meat was there, that's a nace. The answer is no, that the Kahanim have to be aware of this. And they have to know that in spite of the fact they are surrounded by more open nisim gluyim. The rain never put out the mizbeach. You can have a downpour, but it never put out the aish on the mizbeach. Therefore, it's the Kahanim that have to go ahead and be aware that there's something called a nes nister, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is constantly performing nisim to us. And since this is right before Pesach, that's why everybody should see that Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo, because that really is what Yetzias Mitzrayim was about. Rebbeinu Shalom proved once and all for the world he controls the world. He doesn't do this on a daily basis, but he does do this on a daily basis, the nisim nistarim. And from the fact that Rebbeinu Shalom, we saw that he literally controls the world, we have to know that if we had an operation and it all went well and nothing bad happened, that's also a nes nister. It's not going to make the headlines, but it's a nes nister. And that is why the Rebbeinu Shalom said we have to make such a big deal out of Pesach and the nisim gluyim, is because from the nisim gluyim we can extrapolate that the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world on a minute-by-minute basis, and that if we don't have that siyata d'shmaya and help from the Rebbeinu Shalom, we would not be able to exist. And that is the point of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Please, I urge you to see that Ramban, the very last Ramban, in Parshas Bo.